as the government is struggling for a supply of medical oxygen and as the demand for medical oxygen soars amid the spike in cases in the second wave of COVID-19. Arvind Gunasekar, my colleague, reporting on oxygen exports and how they've doubled in pandemic hit India. Between April 2020 and Jan 2021, India exported over 9,000 metric tons of oxygen. Only 4,500 metric tons of oxygen were in fact exported in financial year 2020. So India's oxygen export has essentially doubled. Arvind Gunasekar joins us with the very latest. Arvind, what you're essentially reporting is that our oxygen export has doubled. This is a very crucial development you're reporting on at a time when India is facing an acute shortage.
Yeah, Rishika, as India gasps for oxygen, what we are seeing is a shocking details emerging that shows that Indian government allowed the export of medical oxygen or the oxygen to soar in the recent months. If you could check the data that is available on the Ministry of Commerce, it clearly shows that almost over 9,000 metric ton of oxygen were exported between April 2020 and January 2021. That is over 9,000 metric ton. If you could compare it with the previous financial year, of financial year 2020, that shows that almost 4,500 metric ton of oxygen were imported. But if you could check that this financial year 2021's data, it shows that almost over 9,000 metric ton of oxygen were exported between April 2020 to January 2021. What is more shocking is that if you could check the data of January alone, not the overall data, if you could just check the data of January alone, January shows that over 700% increase in oxygen export. If you could compare the January 20.
All right, we seem to have lost that line with Arvind. We'll try and reconnect with him. But as India is facing an acute shortage of oxygen, the government allowed oxygen exports to soar. That's the statistic as per the Commerce Ministry. Oxygen exports doubled in pandemic hit India. I believe Arvind is back with us. Arvind, go ahead.
Yeah, Rishika, like I have been explaining, this is where the opposition parties are questioning the government, saying that this is a classic example of mishandling of the entire situation. What they are saying is that in January, that is just 2 months ago, India exported oxygen, medical oxygen to neighboring countries. That also includes Bangladesh. If you could check the January data alone, it shows that somewhere around 2,193 metric ton of oxygen were exported in December 2020. And if you could check the January data shows somewhere around over 734% increase. So this is where opposition parties are questioning. Now what we are seeing is that most of the states, including the national capital, is facing acute shortage of medical oxygen. Even the constitutional courts, including the Delhi High Court, had to intervene to ensure that the hospitals get medical oxygen. So they have already asked the central government to intervene now, and even the central government has made a submission saying that they have already banned the supply of oxygen for non-critical industries, so that almost 2,500 metric ton of oxygen can be diverted to the hospitals for medical care. So that's the data of the government is saying. They are saying that by this particular drastic measure, they can save somewhere around 2,500 metric ton of medical oxygen. But what is the question is that Indian government allowed the export of medical oxygen to the extent of over 9,000 metric ton in just 1 year. If you could compare it with the last year data is somewhere around 4,500 metric ton, but
yes,
this year data is 9,000 metric ton, which is almost double. So that's where the government is saying we have to wait for an answer from the government side on this. Rishika?
Arvind, over 700% increase in export in January 2021 versus January 2020. Our oxygen export has doubled this year as compared to last year. What this also goes to show is the fact that the government was completely caught off guard with this second wave. They didn't anticipate that India, at a time would see almost 3 lakh daily cases.
Yeah, Rishika, if you could just take the January data, because at least in December, if you could take the December data, we can there can be a justification saying that the cases were not so high, and that's why there was a demand for the oxygen, and then the export was allowed. So at least for the December data, there seems to be a justification. But if you could just check the January data shows in January 2020, that is last year January, almost 352 metric ton of oxygen were exported. But if you could check the January this year data, that is just 2 months back, almost 2,935 metric ton of oxygen were exported. That is almost an increase of 735%. So this is something that what the experts and what the opposition parties are saying is that this is not that government didn't see this coming, because even in January there was a clear trend of the cases increasing, because we started reporting about the double mutation. We started seeing reports from states like Maharashtra and other states, where those states started reporting about exponential rise in cases in some clusters, in some local areas. So what they are saying is that they are in fact blaming the government, saying that they refused to see this coming. They were very lethargic, they were very complacent, they didn't see this coming. Now because we have allowed the export of over 9,000 metric ton of medical oxygen to the neighboring countries, now we are gasping for our own oxygen, where we are trying to scrabble, where we are trying to get oxygen by banning the oxygen for the non-essential industries, non-critical industries. But even this moment, even at this short of oxygen, they don't have sufficient oxygen. They are still fighting for an oxygen on day-to-day basis. Rishika.
Well, absolutely, Arvind. It is an absolutely shocking statistic that we're putting out on our screens in terms of India's oxygen exports. This coming at a time when India is now seeing nearly 3 lakh daily cases, and several hospitals across the country, not just here in the national capital, are in fact in urgent need of a supply of medical oxygen. Remember, the government, by its own admission on Monday, said that in the second wave of the pandemic, there are more cases of breathlessness, more cases of hospital admissions, and more people requiring oxygen support. So where was the planning? That's the big question.